We'll begin, as all good murder stories do, with the finding of a body. It was the end of May 1375 in the Lincolnshire countryside when the decomposing remains of a man were discovered in the fields near Grayingham. The man was about 30 years old and had been lying there for several months, but his clothes showed that he was a man of means. On examining the body, the coroner decided he had died from diverse mortal wounds caused by a knife. But who was the man? What was the motive for his murder? And what has a court case between William's brother Nicholas and Nicholas's wife some 7 years earlier have to do with anything? Let's travel back in time now to the late 14th century to discover treason, conspiracy, a tiny penis, and the connection between a wife, her lover, the chambermaid, the cook, the squire, and their neighbour. Welcome to Medieval Madness. The body. It was up to the first finder, who was one of the field workers, to raise the alarm and alert the sheriff and the coroner. The village was now responsible for the body and would face a hefty fine if they tried to hide it. The coroner was a man named William de Courton, who was originally from the local area but had gone on to be a successful merchant in London. Sir Thomas de Cydale was the sheriff of Lincolnshire, who joined him for the investigation. Dressed in a riding outfit with a belt and spurs, the dead man was obviously wealthy from the condition of his clothes and the accessories. His body, however, was another matter entirely. Left out in the elements for months, it had been subjected to animal activity and was in a high state of decomposition. However, when de Courton turned the body over, he was able to determine that the victim had been stabbed many times. He was easily identified as the 30-year-old knight Sir William Cantilupe, who had been missing from his home since Easter. The question now was, how had he been set upon by highwaymen, robbed and murdered? Or was there something more sinister going on? The knight. The de Cantilupes were an important family. Based at Scotton in Lincolnshire, in the northeast of the county, the family held a good deal of land and estates in the Midlands. They were loyal to the crown with important roles in local and central government. According to the historian Frederick Pedersen, this made them, quote, one of the most influential families in 14th century England. William was the great-great-nephew of St. Thomas de Cantilupe. The one-time Lord Chancellor and Bishop of Hereford was canonised in 1320 and is said to be the last medieval saint in England. Having a holy man as an ancestor meant that the family considered themselves under his special protection. William had become head of the family after the death of his older brother Nicholas in 1370. William came into the employ of John of Gaunt and served with him overseas between 1370 and 1373. Gaunt was the Duke of Lancaster and an English royal prince, making William a knight of some stature according to the historian J.G. Bellamy. It was at some point during this time that Sir William married Maud, the daughter of Sir Ralph Neville. It's unknown what sort of a relationship Sir William and Maud had, whether the marriage was arranged, if any courtship took place, or even on what dates they were married. The murder. William was getting ready to go to bed one night on an unknown date, sometime between the 13th of February and the 11th of April 1375. He had locked his chamber door, as was his custom. Only Sir William and his wife had a key for the door. Suddenly, his squire Richard Jice and his cook, the aptly named Roger Cook, rushed into the chamber and stabbed Sir William several times, as the record states, quote, until he was dead. A jury later stated that Sir William was at peace with God and the Lord King when he died, so we can assume that he had prayed before getting into bed. Next, the men cleaned his body with heated up water so that they not be discredited by the effusion of the blood of his wounds. This hot water was carried up to Sir William's room and his body was washed to stop the bleeding. Then his naked body was placed in a sack, hauled through the manor and carried on horseback for 4 miles to the edge of Grayingham village. Then the assassins redressed the body in some of his clean clothes to make it look as though he had been attacked by highwaymen and threw him in a ditch. The arrests. After deciding that the highway robbery theory could be ruled out as a motive for the young knight's demise, Sheriff Kydale turned his attention to those closer to Sir William to try and find his culprit. William had been staying at his wife's manor in Scotland when he disappeared, and the manor had been closed down and all of the staff dispersed straight after. Sir William's wife, Lady Maud, was a Neville, and despite the nearest Neville estate only being 8 miles away from Scotland, and Sir William himself having several manors across 3 counties, as well as Greasley Castle in Nottinghamshire, Lady Maud went to Caythorpe Manor some 40 miles away. Caythorpe was owned by Sir Ralph Paynell, who had at one time been the Sheriff of Yorkshire. Curtin and Kydale discovered Lady Maud there at Caythorpe Manor, along with her chambermaid Agatha Lovell and Sir William's squire and his cook. Witnesses swore that she had just up and left Scotland Manor along with her 4 companions without so much as an explanation. All 4 were suspects in the murder, and all 4 were arrested. Sir Ralph Paynell was also indicted for aiding and abetting murders after the fact. If Sir William had been killed at Scotland, then it was highly unlikely that the murders could have taken place without everyone else in the manor being in cahoots, so arrest warrants were issued for all of the servants who had been working at the manor. The brother. But what was the connection between the Paynells and Lady Maud? Why had she gone straight to Caythorpe Manor to seek protection? Well, Ralph Paynell had a daughter named Catherine, who was the wife of Sir William's older brother Nicholas. Their story began around 7 years earlier in 1368, when Nicholas and his wife Catherine found themselves in the consistory court in York. That was when Catherine sued for divorce before the Archbishop. Catherine wanted to dissolve her marriage. The problem, she said, was that Nicholas was incapable of having intercourse with her because he had, quote, insufficient natural instruments. Catherine said she even tried to find William's penis while he was asleep, but found that, quote, it was as flat as the back of her hand down there. Just after their marriage, Catherine went back home to her parents' house crying and eventually told them about her problems with Nicholas in the marital bed. Although her father supposedly called her a stupid girl and blamed it on her inexperience as a 17-year-old, Catherine was able to convince the family that she was telling the truth. When Nicholas realised that Catherine was going to take her grievance to court, he abducted her and took her back to his ancestral home at Greasley Castle. He accused her of lying and said that she had already known him carnally and knew that he was more than capable of having sex with her. Nicholas then threatened to have her kept at his castle in irons. So, 9 years before the murder of Sir William in 1366, Catherine's father, Sir Ralph Paynell, the man who owned Caythorpe Manor, arrived with his entourage at Greasley and attacked the castle with bows and sticks, and took away about £2,000 worth of silver plate and jewellery, which we can only assume was Catherine's dowry. Now, normally what would happen in those circumstances is that Nicholas would be given a physical examination to prove his wife's story as false, but he repeatedly refused to do this. He was even excommunicated by the church because he didn't turn up in front of the court. Eventually, sentence was passed to dissolve the marriage because of the circumstantial evidence. Nicholas was so incensed by this that he went off to Avignon to seek an appeal with the Pope, but died while he was abroad. To add even more fuel to the feudal fire, after the death of Nicholas, Catherine had argued that the couple had enfeoffed 3 castles, and she now had the rights to them and their lands. But Sir William won the case against her and was granted legal possession of the estate. Could it be that Sir Ralph Paynell was so angered by the annulment of his daughter Catherine's marriage to Nicholas, and the subsequent loss of her 3 castles to his brother, that he had helped to arrange the murder of Sir William? The trial. The Treason Act of 1351 stated that the killing of a man by either his wife or servants was deemed to be petty treason. This meant that if either Lady Maud or the chambermaid Agatha were found guilty of the crime, then they would be burned to death, and the male servants would be drawn to the place of execution, hanged, and then quartered, so the stakes were kinda high. 15 members of staff from the house at Scotland were indicted along with Lady Maud and Sir Ralph Paynell. The King's Bench was held in Lincoln and presided over by Sheriff Thomas Kydale. In the early proceedings, there was a little uncertainty as to what part Lady Maud had played in the murder of her husband. Some thought she was the mastermind behind the plot, others believed her just to be an accessory. She was quick to point the finger at the squire and the cook. It wasn't long before the jury convicted them of murder, and they were sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. It's no surprise, the men were poor and without connections. Lady Maud, however, was granted maniprise by the sheriff and released from custody on his guarantee of her reappearance before the court at a later date. She was later acquitted along with the steward Robert Cletham, not just of the murder, but also of having any participation in it. Agatha Lovell, the chambermaid, avoided her trial by bribing the bailiffs at Lincoln Jail into letting her escape. As for Sir Ralph Paynell, he was tried 6 months later and acquitted of sheltering the suspects and of knowing them to be guilty of William Cantilupe's murder. The twist. Within just 2 years of William's murder, the Sheriff of Lincoln, Sir Thomas Kydale, got himself into a little bit of bother with the King of England. Richard II wasn't happy when he found out that Kydale had gone and married a widow without asking for royal permission. The widow in question was none other than Lady Maud herself. So it's not much of a stretch to think that this affair had been going on for a while and the sheriff had been helping to cover up things for the murderers. And then there's Sir Ralph Paynell. Could Sir William's murder have been a conspiracy between Paynell, a man with a grudge, who hated the Cantilupe family, and Lady Maud and Thomas Kydale? Whatever the reason, the death of Sir William de Cantilupe marked the end of his family line. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please do subscribe if you're enjoying this video, and I'll see you next week for another one. Until then, hope everyone has an awesome week. Cheers!